The European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker has appointed a veteran French politician to lead negotiations on Britain's withdrawal from the European Union. Michel Barnier will take up his new post on October 1st. He is a former EU Commissioner and French Foreign and Agriculture Minister. Juncker has praised him as a skilled negotiator and an experienced politician. The British government has welcomed the news. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Theresa May met with Italian Prime Minister Matteo Renzi in the continuation of her round of visits with European leaders. She reiterated her desire to maintain strong ties with EU partners despite the Brexit. May also hopes that she will be able to address the issue of the rights of EU nationals living in Britain and British citizens living in the EU early on during the Brexit talks. Let's bring in Derek Conway. He's a former British MP who joins us to share with us his thoughts on this. So what do you think about this appointment from the EC President Jean-Claude Juncker, a former EU Commissioner, to be now leading the talks?
I think it's not a surprise that Mr. Juncker will do anything in his power to make life as difficult as possible for the United Kingdom. And by appointing a former French agricultural minister, he's just twisting the knife, if you like. And for those that want Britain to be out of Europe and free of Europe, it's actually very good news, because the more Mr. Juncker does to irritate everybody, the more likely that the British government will just pull the plug on everything. What Britain really wants is a trade agreement with Europe, and because Britain imports so much more from Europe than it exports, it's going to be in their interest to have that. But if the French play hardball, then I don't think Britain's got anything to lose by just saying, well, forget it, there are bigger markets elsewhere in the world and we'll get on with it while Europe busy disintegrates under the burden of its own bureaucracy.
Well, there's a saying in the U.S., they say money talks. I mean, if the U.K. actually has a lot to offer, do you think all the decisions are going to lie on this one French politician who's been appointed to this? Because obviously Britain has a lot to offer to the EU.
Like in all things with the European Union, I think the new French negotiator will find a couple of very large, heavy Germans standing behind him, because the truth is Germany has to pay for everything in the European Union. The French don't. Britain is the second highest contributor to the EU money pot, and that's how Greece and Spain and Portugal and Italy managed to get the slush funds out of the European Commission. Well, when the British checks stop, somebody's going to have to fill the gap, or they're going to have to reduce their budgets. Bureaucrats don't like cutting budgets, so the German taxpayer is going to have to give up some more money. Well, I don't think that's going to be very popular for Mrs. Merkel, who's facing re-election next year. So whatever the negotiators say and whatever the difficult and often drunken Mr. Juncker says, the truth is the Germans will be saying, let's be sensible about this, because the German car industry, the German industry generally, doesn't want to lose its UK market. So I think the negotiations will turn out to be very sensible once all this hot air from Mr. Juncker and his colleagues is out of the way.
A little confusion, the question that's been asked as to who is going to be leading the talks for the UK. Is it going to be Osborne, or are we looking at Philip Hammond giving his input, or a combination of the team from Theresa May?
It won't be George Osborne anymore, because Mrs. May has sacked him. So he's out of the frame now, and he's just an ordinary backbench MP like so many others, no longer the big man pulling all the levers in Britain. A man called David Davis has been appointed by Mrs. May as the Secretary of State for the negotiations. So he will be leading the European negotiating team in all of that. Mr. Hammond, as Foreign Secretary, will have some input, but Mr. Davis will be the point man on all this. And he's a former Europe minister in Britain, so he's used to the European Council and the way the European machine works. So I think we've all got a lot of faith that Mr. Davis will come out within a good negotiation. And the truth is, he's got to, because Mrs. May's entire premiership rests on how good a deal Britain gets out of this. The British people not only voted to be out of the EU, they voted to take back control themselves. So this is an exercise in parliamentary democracy and financial control as much as it is about trade. Trade's very important, but it's not the only thing.
Yeah, I made a mistake there, Derek Conway. Instead of saying Boris Johnson, I said George Osborne, because Boris Johnson just made his debut at the EU Parliament. Obviously, I would think that the reception was lukewarm at best, but they said that he behaved. Will he have an effect on these talks between the UK and the EU?
I think Boris Johnson's remit is going to be the wider world rather than Europe. I mean, we still have lots of negotiating to do with Europe on other matters where we have common interests, on security matters, on criminal matters. So our relationship with Europe is not all just about the EU institutions themselves. So Boris Johnson, as the new Foreign Secretary, his remit will be to pursue all of that, but focus much, much more on the wider world and the British Commonwealth. Whereas Philip Hammond, as the Chancellor of the Exchequer, will be watching where the money goes very, very carefully. He's the former Foreign Secretary, now in charge of the money as Chancellor of the Exchequer. So all of these big beasts in the British political jungle will have their chance to roar. But the man at the front holding the spear will be David Davis, and it'll be his job to prod Mr. Juncker and his European Commission into making Britain's exit from the European Union as clean and bloodless as it's possible to be. It's not going to be in the EU's interest to have Britain angry and sidelined, because after this is all over, they still want Britain to contribute to NATO, to contribute to intelligence sharing, and the many other intergovernmental relations that go on. So there'll be a lot of hot air coming out of the French ministry, because there always is. But at the end of the day, the Germans will make them see sense.
Very well. Pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for that. Derek Conway, former British MP there from London.